last summer I found all these really great little paper mache boxes at Dollar Tree, and they had a whole box of them. That I just grabbed the whole box, and they have these nice little lids. They're really sturdy. You can paint them. You can decoupage on them. They had them in hearts, circles, and squares, and I had got mostly squares in the box. I didn't even know what I was picking up. I just grabbed the whole thing and went up to the checkout with it and checked them out later to see what I actually ended up getting. But since I had so many squares, I wanted to do something cool with it, so I took a square and I painted it black, and I'm going to turn this one into a Rubik's Cube design, although I really think that you can do a whole bunch of different types of designs if you're using a decoupage technique on here. So I pulled out some things that I'm going to use for that. And I'm going to, of course, kind of avoid this area when I decoupage. I'm going to avoid the area that goes right under the lip of the box because I don't want to tear up anything. I don't want to rip the paper as I'm opening and closing it, so that's going to stay black underneath. But on the side, I'm going to continue the design, from the top to the side. Since it's not a perfect cube, it's a perfect square on the top. It's about 4 by 4 inches here and there. But on the side, of course, it's 4 inches this way, but a little bit shorter right here. So I'm gonna have to just change up the look of the squares of the Rubik's Cube on the side. But I think rather than doing one color on each side like it's a solved Rubik's Cube, I think I'm gonna do this all mixed up, jumbled up. So I pulled out construction paper and some scissors, and I just used regular black paint here, acrylic paint, to do a couple of coats on the box so it came out nice and solid. So I have these colors for the Rubik's Cube, and so I pulled out all the colors of a traditional Rubik's Cube, the 6 colors. But this would look cool since it's on a black background. This would look cool doing neon colors or anything like that. But I do also think that construction paper, because of how it feels, kind of like newsprint, a little bit maybe not as smooth as a regular printer paper, I think this will do a better job adhering to this when I use some Mod Podge to cover over this area and stick my squares on. So I need to get them all measured and cut to size so I have some squares to work with. So since the top of the box is about 4 by 4, and you want to measure that ahead of time, so you have, well, a little less, but 4 and about 4, I'm going to cut my paper into squares. So I need to use this to trace, but I'm going to do one of each of the 6 colors. I'm going to make a square that is maybe a little bit smaller than the size of my my lid. So the way I'm doing that evenly is I'm just sort of pushing this off to the corner area with the same amount of space on both sides. So kind of getting a little bit smaller, but keeping about like a little, maybe a 1/4 of an inch on both sides. So I'll trace my square, and I can put a couple behind it because this is so thin, the construction paper. It'll just let me, if I stack it neatly, I can cut all 3 of them at once, just hold them in place and squeeze really good between your thumb and your index finger to hold the paper still so that it doesn't shift around while you're cutting it. And then cut yourself your squares that you're going to be working with. And you're not going to use all of this, but cut yourself plenty of squares so that way when you're going to lay them out and you decide how you want to do like a random pattern so it looks like the Rubik's Cube hasn't been solved, that way you have plenty to work with. So you want to have like 2 white ones on top of each other next to a row of blues, so it looks like it's partially solved. Then you have some stuff to play with to see what's the best look for yours. And so I'm just cutting the last 3 colors here while holding the one that has already been cut on top as my template, so I don't have to trace it because I already know what size, and I'm just going to hold on to it really good so it doesn't move around. So I've got my 6 different colors cut into a little less than, maybe it's like a 3 by 3 square at this point. All right, so I've got those to work with, and I'll set those aside. So now the thing about the side is I want this to be my gauge for about how big I need my square to be. So I'm still going to keep my piece is going to be cut to about this size here, like a 3-inch piece, maybe like this, on one side. So let's just maybe about 3 inches, 3.5, and then but I'm going to cut them to this this width, so it's going to be about a 1/2 inch across, and I'm going to use that for the whole side. So they're going to be smaller, they're going to be more like rectangle little strips instead of squares. So just bear with me while I get those cut, and I might just cut them all at once because why not. I can always trim them later if I don't like the way it turned out. Came out a little crooked, that's fine. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, and I know enough in my mind of what a 1/2 inch looks like that I'm able to do this without really measuring. So I can just cut little strips like this. So I actually saw somebody solve a Rubik's Cube once, and in about 6 seconds they told me that he would be able to solve it. It was one of the kids at the school where I work, and so I said, oh yeah, I want to see, I want to watch, and I was able to catch him in the hall one day, and I was like, hey, here's a Rubik's Cube, can you solve this? They told me you can solve it in like 6 seconds, and he did, and I was so impressed, and I just thought that was so cool. And I always think it's just incredible how people can do something like that. So amazing, right? How do you figure that out? How do you solve a Rubik's Cube in 6 seconds? They can figure that out, and then someone can go and top that. You know, someone can go and solve a Rubik's Cube in 5 seconds, and then somebody else can go solve a Rubik's Cube with one hand behind their back or with their eyes closed or something crazy like that. So I just think that's so cool how people can be so talented. And all I've ever done is fidget with one, which is kind of what they end up being anyways. So nowadays, everybody's got a fidget in the classroom. Everybody's got something to play with. I've got my Mod Podge pulled out that I'll be using later. So I've got this here, just the gloss Mod Podge. Probably shouldn't use the gloss on this one. I would probably want to match the paint and do something matte. But this is what I had handy, so I grabbed that. It doesn't matter. You could even use Elmer's glue. That's fine too. That would give it like the matte look also if you use white Elmer's glue. So that would be fine. But I was researching Rubik's Cubes and found out that it was invented by a professor. I think he was an architect or something like that. So he was trying to teach his students a concept, something about 3D shapes or 3D building or something like that. And it was like a problem-solving tool. So he kind of created something that would be used by his students. You know, very, very rough first version of a Rubik's Cube. But then he was, I guess, kind of got to work on perfecting it and started to try different materials. He ended up making one out of wood, and then he never actually planned on it being a bestseller, being this popular, you know, #1 Christmas item or whatever it ended up being. So I think that's pretty cool. It's just an accidental invention like that he never intended to be what it became. So now, you know, something that was invented in 1974 and we're still using it, and kids are crazy about them today. So now I'm going to work on the lid, so we'll get those little top pieces done. So again, kind of separate it in your mind. See where those lines would be to separate this into thirds, and if you need to, you could just use a ruler to do that. There, and then separate each of these into thirds, so you're going to have little squares. There you go. Perfect. And I know on these I'm only going to have 9 of each. Only I don't actually need that because this is not a cube. This is only a square on the top and bottom, but I'm not going to do anything on the bottom, of course. I'm just going to do the top and the sides. So now I'm just going to get to work on applying these to the box. So I've got the Mod Podge I'm going to put into a little cup here, and I've got a foam brush that I always like to use whenever I do anything with Mod Podge. So I've got this here, just a spongy brush. These are very cheap, so if you want to end up throwing it away when you're done, if it gets a little crusty on the edges, that's fine because they're so cheap. You can buy like a 6-pack at the dollar store. I think that's pretty cheap. Or they do wash easily. You know, you just have to squeeze them out multiple times while the water's running over them, and maybe a little bit of soap too, so it doesn't get, this has a little crusty something on there from whatever last project didn't quite come off. But they're good for, you know, several uses before you have to do anything like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and use that. Maybe arrange a pattern, figure out what I want to do, or maybe just let it come to me naturally and just have it all be random. And then I'll just kind of speed through this so you can kind of see how to brush the glue on first, stick your square on, and then brush glue over it. That's what I'll be doing. it so much. It's still pretty sticky, so if I wanted to, I could throw on some glamour dust, some glitter on there, just to make it, extra cool. But what you'll notice is I did not put any glue underneath the lip here because I learned from a previous experience. I was making a recipe box and I Mod Podged the whole thing, and the problem is every time you open and close it, it just sort of kind of starts to tear up the paper a little bit, and so you have to be extra careful because it'll stick. The whole thing gets a little tacky because of the glue even when it's dry, so it'll still have that little kind of a tacky feel. So I avoided that this time by just not putting any paint on this area where it's going to overlap. Kind of learned my lesson because the inside is smooth, so they open and close so easily when the box is dry. So I figured, well, maybe this will help that, and it does. I kind of also realized something as I was going. I was trying to keep track of how many of each, so I was just keeping a little note of how many reds, yellows, greens, blues, whites, and oranges I did. That way I never exceeded 9, although I kind of was also factoring in the fact that I don't have a bottom, so that part, was going to end up with less anyway. So I think I did a nice job of doing it randomly without being, affected by patterns and anything like that, because sometimes your mind just wants to go with nice and neat, but I like it better random. And I think this makes for a really cool box. It could even be a box that you put your fidgets in. Not a Rubik's Cube, of course, it's too short for that, but you could put your little fidget spinners in there or whatever.